Good day, everyone, and welcome to the international launch of the Migrant Integration Policy Index, or MIPEX. My name is Thomas Huddleston. I'm the Research Director of the Migration Policy Group, a 25-year-old think and do tank working on integration, anti-discrimination, and migration here in Brussels. I've been helping to coordinate the index since 2007, and I'm very happy to welcome you all to this international launch. This international launch is the accumulation of several years of research with over 150 experts and partners in every one of our countries. We have also been launching this index with national launches that have started in October. And we have now already had launches in almost all of our countries, thanks to the efforts of our national partners. This international launch is allowing you to get a look at the full data and the key messages from this year's MIPEX 2020. So it is my great honor to welcome you to this launch and also to walk you through how today is going to be working. So what we're going to do is first give you some perspective on the MIPEX before we go into our key findings for 2020. And then we're going to be digging into the two biggest international areas of weakness in integration policy around the world: migrant education and political participation, where we're going to be hearing from two of the most leading experts and practitioners in this area, from the Sirius Network and from the Transatlantic Migrant Democracy Dialogue. We'll then pivot to look at what can be done at the European level in order to help countries better improve and implement their integration policies by turning to our colleagues from the European Commission to look at where there might be links between MIPEX and the new EU Integration Action Plan. So if during this webinar you want to ask a question, you can do so. If you're joining us here on the webinar, you can do that through the Q&A function. And if you're joining us on live stream through Facebook, you can also ask a question through the comments section. We have colleagues Carmen and Khadija who are gathering together your questions. So please do keep asking questions all throughout this webinar, and Carmen and Khadija will collect them together and lead our Q&A session, which will close off this webinar. We highly encourage you to tweet during this webinar by using the hashtag MIPEX2020. And you can also tag the MIPEX Twitter account at @_MIPEX. So to kick us off, if you want to know everything about MIPEX, then go to the website www.mipex.eu, where you'll find the full MIPEX online book and the full online data source. All of our country profiles, our international results, our area by area results, and examples of MIPEX in use. The Migrant Integration Policy Index is one of the most comprehensive tools that we have. It's also one of the most reliable and most used indexes to compare integration policies. That's because MIPEX includes the largest number of indicators that allow us to look at all of these different policies and see to what extent each policy is supporting equal rights, opportunities, and security, or perhaps creating obstacles that undermine immigrants' participation. It's also comprehensive in terms of the methodology, working with, as I said, over 150 national experts who give us all of the comments and the scores on the situation in their own country. And then we do a second full quality and consistency check here with the team at the Migration Policy Group. It's also comprehensive because it has a long longitudinal scope. We have data now covering over a decade, from 2007 until last year, right before the pandemic, 2019. It's also comprehensive because of its thematic scope, looking at 8 areas that are key to integration: labor market mobility, family reunification, education, health, permanent residence, anti-discrimination, and access to nationality. And it's also growing. This latest edition of MyPECS has a geographic scope covering 52 countries worldwide on 5 continents, from North and South America, all of Europe, East Asia, and Oceania. Now, MyPECS is the most cited international benchmark for integration policies because it's used by practitioners to see what their areas of strength are, but also what might be potential areas of weakness or improvement that they haven't really considered for their integration policies. And it allows them to also see what are the regional trends, what are the best practices, and who is leading in these different areas. So MyPECS is regularly used by policymakers who are considering to make policy changes, by NGOs who are looking for evidence to substantiate what they're seeing on the ground and to feed their advocacy work, by media who are trying to compare across countries, and by researchers. Most recently and most prominently, the MyPECS figured in the original Zero draft of the UN Global Compact on Migration, calling for all states to participate in the MyPECS as a way to identify challenges and best practices. So this version of MyPECS gives you all of that, but also we learn from those people who are using MyPECS, and we bring those results into the index. So the MyPECS team here at MPG has looked at all of the multivariate and multi-level analyses being done and published in academic and independent scientific journals that are looking to see what are the possible effects of integration policies. What are the links that we see internationally across Europe, across the world, between integration policies and integration outcomes? And these results are really important because working in one country, you'll never be able to see these links between policies and outcomes as clearly as when you look internationally. So we have brought together 130 peer-reviewed studies that have identified over 400 links between MyPECS and the integration outcomes for immigrants and the public. So I'm now going to give you a little taste of how researchers have been using MyPECS and what they've been finding as a result.
MyPECS is a unique indicator that helps us researchers. There are 3 important elements that I like about MyPECS. First, it is comparative. It helps us to understand outcomes between countries. Secondly, it is publicly available and coded in a transparent manner. Thirdly, it is all longitudinal, so it helps us to understand trends between countries and across time.
I think MyPECS offers useful indicators to assess and evaluate the integration policies for migrants across a range of policy areas, including, of course, education. And while there were many attempts to develop some sort of indices of inclusion before, none of them offered such a systematic reflection and comparative reflection on existing policies and integration structures.
I think to add to that, within Sirius and the countries that we work with, we hold yearly multi-stakeholder platform meetings which gather together migrant activists, policymakers, teachers, students, and the MyPECS has been a useful reference tool for those national policy discussions. Again, it sort of raises the relevant questions and it can trigger thinking processes on what possible solutions there might be to issues found within the education systems.
This whole of government approach was very useful when pandemic arrived. The immigrants were waiting for their documentation from the Immigration Border Services. We issued that they would be considered documented during pandemic. And so like this, they could also have access to layoff benefits, to unemployment benefits, and others. So this means they could save jobs and improve the family security.
We found that even after controlling for characteristics of the workers, Those recent migrants who were in countries that had a more supportive legislation were more likely to enter the labor market and take up more training and education, and thereby probably find better quality jobs in the long run. So it's mainly the case for non-EU migrants who are more difficult to activate and face more disadvantage.
What I find is that comprehensive anti-discrimination laws are a key factor in promoting citizens' knowledge about their rights to equal treatment and how to stand up against discrimination. In other words, in countries with strong anti-discrimination laws, people tend to know much more about their rights to equal treatment than in countries with weaker laws.
And the ability of welfare states to ameliorate poverty would depend on the stringency of policies that states attached to gaining legal residency status for immigrants.
So my research that uses MyPACS shows that naturalization policies directly affect naturalization outcomes. If politicians impose additional requirements for the acquisition of citizenship, such as longer residence period, language requirements, integration requirements, higher fees, or dual citizenship restrictions, then this means that immigrants are less likely to acquire citizenship.
We analyze data from the Eurobarometer as well as from the European Value Study, but both analyses yield identical findings. There is a clear negative relationship between the MyPACS score and threat perceptions across European countries. In countries where integration policies are most generous, citizens feel least threatened by newcomers in society.
Paper that I contributed to as a big review of by UN Women. There was a chapter called Families on the Move, which was part of a review that they had, which was published in 2019, called Families in a Changing World. And I used it there as a review of the difficulties and the differences between countries in the way that they applied family reunification.
To give you an example, for instance, with regard to political participation, the measurement of MyPACS on local and national political rights invites countries like Canada that have an easy access to citizenship and are at a secure pathway to it, to think outside the box about conceding local political rights to non-citizens before they become citizens. So, or countries like Denmark that rather quickly give local political rights, but have a more difficult path to citizenship, to revisit their citizenship policies. So it allows also for nuance and variation within each measurement.
So I just want to leave you with these core messages of this new edition of MyPACS that also looks at why integration policies matter. And this independent research finds that integration policies are one of the strongest factors that can influence public opinion. Integration policies can be a key for public welcome. And here you, for example, see on the x-axis how well a country scored on this latest version of MyPACS. And on the y-axis, you see how open the public was to migrants as measured by Gallup on its Migrant Acceptance Index based on public opinion. And you see a very strong relationship here. So policies that become more inclusive can set off a virtuous cycle, helping the public to slowly open to immigrants, whereas policies that become more restrictive can set off a vicious cycle, leading to not only greater perceptions of anti-immigrant threat, but also things like xenophobia, Islamophobia, lack of social trust, and lack of interaction. And these policies matter not just for public opinion, but integration policies are also a key to immigrants' happiness. There are now a load of studies that we present to you on the mypacs.eu website that link integration policies with immigrants' own attitudes and outcomes. And here I show you on the x-axis again how well a country did on this version of MyPACS, and on the y-axis I show you the famous World Happiness Report, where they also looked at how happy the foreign-born said that they were in their country. And again, you see this strong relationship that's also drawn out in many other studies that find that inclusive integration policies help close gaps in terms of immigrants' life satisfaction, their sense of belonging and pride in their country, their social trust, their voting, their conventional political participation, as well as their unconventional political participation. We even have studies that find that inclusive integration policies might be good for immigrants' health. If you want to look more, there's a great study from The Lancet, the prestigious global medical journal. And in many other areas, such as education, anti-discrimination, and what you've heard earlier. So with this in mind about why integration policies matter, we wanted to give you then the latest on how policies are changing around the world and what trends we're seeing. So for that, I turn over to my colleague, Dr. Giacomo Solano, who is the International MIPEX coordinator this time around.
Thank you, Thomas. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm going to share the screen. So as Thomas said, I'm going to illustrate the key findings from this edition of MIPEX. And I'm going to answer in the following 15 minutes to these 5 questions. The first one relates to the main dimension of integration policies that we found among MIPEX countries. Then I will answer to the question on the approaches that these countries have towards migration. Then I will illustrate the countries that are the leader on integration policies, and also which countries have improved or undermined their policies, so the changes over time. And then I will conclude with showing the international strengths and weaknesses among MIPEX 52 countries. So starting with the first question, so about the main dimension of integration policies. In this edition, we analyzed the data collected, and we found that we found 3 main dimensions underlying the approach of MIPEX countries toward integration policies or towards integration. The first dimension relates to access to basic rights and to whether or not migrants can enjoy comparable rights as nationals. Like, for example, equal rights to work, equal rights to training, access to the healthcare system, and whether or not they are protected by anti-discrimination laws. The second dimension related to access to equal opportunities and whether or not migrants receive enough support to enjoy comparable opportunity as nationals. Here it relates more on target support and an area like education or political participation, and also on the support that migrants receive to concretely access, for example, the healthcare system. So as you see, the first dimension, basic rights, relate on the access, while the second one is more on the actual support that they receive on accessing something like the healthcare, or to improve their opportunities like on education, through education, or to improve their political participation. The third dimension relates to the future, to the long-term settlement, to the secure future. And it's whether or not immigrants are able or are supported with their long-term settlement in the country, and they can feel secure about their future in the country. So here, this dimension relates to family reunification, for example, to access to permanent residence and access to nationality. Based on these 3 dimensions, we were also now able to answer to the question about the different approaches that countries in MIPEX have toward migrant integration. And we found 5 main approaches. The first one, the first approach, let's say, that we call top 10, have countries that they invest in equal rights, opportunities, and long-term security. So migrants in those countries enjoy opportunities and enjoy access to equal rights, access to equal opportunities, and they are also able, they are supported with their long-term security, their long-term settlement in the countries. The second group is similar to the top 10, because they have as the top 10 a comprehensive approach toward integration. So they invest in all the 3 dimensions of integration, so rights, opportunity, and security, but they go only halfway to do so. And so this is the main difference between the 2. So as I said, the first 2 groups invest in all the 3 dimensions, while there are other countries that invest in 1 or 2 dimensions, but not all the 3. Among these, a group of countries apply a temporary integration approach. So they invest and they support migrants, and they ensure that migrants have equal access to rights and equal opportunities. But migrants in this country, they are not well supported or supported enough with their long-term settlement. The first group of countries as an approach that we decide to call equality on paper, because these countries offer access to basic rights and long-term security to their migrants, but migrants in these countries do not enjoy equal opportunities as nationals. So, the investment in integration and the policies relate more on the on-paper side of the integration policy making, and that's why we decide to call it equality on paper. The last group of countries include countries that invest more on security. So migrants in these countries, they have opportunities for long-term settlement, but they are not supported enough when it comes to access to rights and to equal opportunities. And also often this long-term settlement is precluded to some group of migrants. So they focus, for example, on high-skilled migrants sometimes. We call this group of countries and this approach immigration without integration, because there are countries that they are not investing enough, let's say, in the integration of migrants in the country. So now I would like to show you a video, and this video it's about the top 10 countries. So the countries that belong to the first approach. You see the 10 countries that are in the top 10, and that belongs to the first group that provide a comprehensive approach to integration. In the 5 approaches, you already see that there are sometimes some differences in the degree of development. Now favorable are policies. We decide, starting from these 5 groups, we decide to create 10 groups based on the degree of development on the policies within the same among countries in the same group, in the same approach, and we then ranked these 10 groups based on the average score that these groups have. So the average of the scores that countries in this group have. I'm going to show you a visual of that. So this is, by the way, is the key findings page on the MyPEX website, and you see, and you will find all the content that I was talking about. So here is the map with the 10 groups that we identified starting from the 5 different approaches, and as you can see, there are subgroups within these approaches, like for example, temporary integration, countries in the temporary integration, employing a temporary integration approach have been sorted into subgroups based on how favorable their policy are. The same goes for equality on paper. And you can see again that the darker the shade is of the color, the least favorable the policies of the group of countries are. And if you look at the map, there are some regional trends emerging. You can see, for example, that Asian countries, and including Russia, so China, India, Indonesia, for example, and also Japan, employ an immigrant without integration approach. However, in Asia, there is, let's say, an exception. There is a regional leader, which is Korea, which has a halfway favorable comprehensive integration approach. You can also see that the traditional destination countries, the non-European one, together with also the Nordics, like Sweden and Finland, apply a comprehensive approach, and they are in the top 10 group. Interestingly, also, you can see the approach of Latin American countries. We include in this edition 4 countries: Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Mexico. And you see that among them, the main approach is the equality on paper approach, while actually the only one having a different approach is Brazil, being in the top 10 with the comprehensive integration approach. The case of Brazil is really interesting, and we can come back later on that, because in the last 5 years, the country improved its policies, and before it applied a equality on paper approach, while now it's applying a more comprehensive approach towards integration. If we zoom in Europe, you can see that within Europe there are some regional variation. The first thing that I would like to stress is that there is no a common European approach, and nor also a Western European approach. So you see that, for example, the central corridor, let's say, or countries in the central corridors apply a temporary approach to integration, while other countries in Europe, like for example, Spain, Portugal, and Ireland, they apply a more comprehensive approach. The eastern part of Europe is quite homogeneous because they have an equality on paper approach with 2, let's say, exception and leaders, let's say, Estonia and Czechia, which apply a more comprehensive approach, although they only go halfway in doing that. The map also shows that there is no common Mediterranean approach, as countries in the Mediterranean, they do not apply the same approach. Like, for example, as I said, Spain has a more comprehensive approach, while Italy has a more temporary approach to integration. Greece applies an equality on paper approach, and Turkey, for example, a more comprehensive approach. There is also the case of Cyprus, where policies are more similar to immigrants, to Asian countries, actually, because Cyprus apply an immigration without integration approach. So I'm now coming back to the PowerPoint. And so before we have analyzed the data and try to understand the approaches and the different groups of countries when it comes to tackle in the integration of migrants. Now we are moving, and we also saw the leaders among the MIPEX countries, so the top 10 countries. And now we are moving we are going to do some more an additional comparison between a group of countries. Like, for example, I would like now to compare European countries, OECD countries, and traditional destination countries. Again, what we can see is that Europe is not an homogeneous, or the EU is not an homogeneous group of countries, while there are still quite some differences between the oldest EU countries, the EU 15 here, and the newest European countries, the EU 13, which have quite a different score, and the EU 13 have less favorable policies. Within the EU 15, you can find also a traditional country of destination. So it's interesting also to compare the policy of those countries of the EU 15 with the non-European traditional destination countries like Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the US. And you can see that the non-European traditional destination countries have still more favorable policies than the European traditional country of destination. However, there are some changes. There are some trends, changing trends. So here I'm going to show. I'm showing what countries have improved or undermined their policies, and again I'm focused on the same subgroups. You can see that here the countries that have the least favorable policies, the EU 13, have actually improved the most over the last 5 years. And the countries that have the most favorable policies among MIPEX countries, so the traditional country of destination, have actually undermined their policies, especially Australia. So there is really a trend towards convergence, or this is what it seems from, it emerges from the data. In general, an average MIPEX country improved its policies over the last 5 years by 2 points. There are, of course, exceptions and, let's say, outliers to this average. On the, let's say, positive side, countries like Turkey improved a lot their policies. For example, as I said, Turkey by plus 17 points. Within Europe, the country that improved the most was Luxembourg, plus 10, and outside the EU and Europe, Brazil was the country that improved the most with by 12 points. On the, let's say, on the not so good side, we have, for example, in Europe, Denmark, which undermined by minus 4 points its score, its policies over the last 5 years, and outside Europe, Australia, as I already said, but also Argentina. Argentina is a little bit the opposite case than Brazil, because before it was in 2014, it was in the top 10 by applying a comprehensive approach, and now it falls into the equality on paper approach. While, as I said, Brazil is the other way around. I'm now moving to the last question, so about the strengths and the weaknesses of migration of the countries on migration policies, on integration policies. I'm addressing this topic both using the 3 dimensions that we identified at the beginning, but also going into details in the 8 different policy areas that MIPEX employs. You can see that when it comes to the 3 dimensions, the strength, the area when the policies are most favorable is the one related to access to basic rights, where immigrants in MIPEX country enjoy more opportunities, have more opportunities than obstacles. Unfortunately, let's say this is not completely true for the other 2 dimensions, especially when it comes to equal opportunities. Policies on average are still halfway favorable, but as you can see, the score is under 50. And then this means that immigrants face more obstacles than opportunities, let's say, in this particular dimension. When it comes to the policy areas, the 8 policy areas, you can see that the trends is similar. The trends in each policy area and the score, the average score, is similar to the overall one, which is 50. That means that on average, immigrants have or enjoy the same opportunities as but also they face as migrants, non-migrants, but they also face some obstacles. This is particularly true in the two areas that scored the lowest, so education and political participation. While the strength among the most, let's say, favorable area among MIPEX countries is anti-discrimination, where they have really, where countries have really developed good policies. So I'm now going to conclude, and I want to stress 5 main points. The first one is that, as I showed, the countries differ significantly in their approach to integration. This approach, each approach, the 5 approaches that I talked about at the beginning, have different strengths and weaknesses, as beside the one having a comprehensive approach, the others invest more in one area than in the other. Then I also show that integration policies are slowly improving over time, with also some differences between, for example, the traditional country of destination outside Europe, the EU13, the EU15, and the other group of countries. The major international weaknesses is on equal opportunities, and as I said, especially on education and political participation. And then I want to come back to what Thomas said, and stress the importance also of integration policies and why, and underline why integration policies matter. And it's because they matter when it comes to integration as a two-way process for both the immigrants and also the public. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Giacomo. And again, if any of you are interested in any of these trends, please go directly to mypex.eu. If you have questions for either of us, start adding them in the Q&A function. That's how we're going to be having the discussion, since we have 250 participants here with us. But again, MIPEX is a tool for a wider audience, for researchers, for media, for policymakers, for NGOs, to think about how we can be improving our integration policies. And that's why we wanted to focus in this international area of weakness in equal opportunities in 2 key areas: migrant education and political participation and citizenship for immigrants. So as I said, we're turning to 2 key expert practitioners, a great combination of the both. First, I'd like to introduce Mialy Dermish, who is now the executive director of the Serious Migrant Education Network, one of the main advisors to the European Commission on education, to give us her take on who we should be following, who we should be listening to, what our priorities could be. So Mialy, over to you on education.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you for being part of this excellent launch. It's so great to have so many people on board to listen to how important it is that we really start focusing on education policy, because it really is, I think as many people on the call will know, if they are migrants and refugees or they have been working on the issue, education is really that one issue that most people believe is the thing that is going to make a difference in the future for them. So what I wanted to do was actually something a little bit more interactive, so that I can get an idea of how much people know about the kinds of policies that do make a bit of a difference in the lives of migrants and refugees. So I was going to launch 3 different polls to delve into 3 different issues and ask everyone to vote on what they believe would be the best option if they had 2 options. So the first one, I'm going to set the scene. Your name is Saida, you are from Iraq and you have come to a Central European country. You have 2 choices here. So you can join a class of kids from lots of different countries to practice your language skills for about a year before you join a regular mainstream class in a mainstream school. You're going to be taught by a teacher who's trained specifically in language of instruction for your non-native students. Okay, so you're around 12 years old, you walk in, you have a chance to join a lot of other children, perhaps similar to you from different places who are learning the language. Your other option, option 2, is that you join a regular class immediately. So you get straight into a class where you don't understand what's going on because people are talking fast in a language that you don't know very well.
But you will get several help. You will get some help a couple times a week from a language teacher who is trained in teaching students in the language of instruction. So you will get some opportunity to learn the language itself, as well as be in this mainstream classroom. So if you go on, you can choose your poll. It should be up on your screen now. The first choice is joining the children from different countries, and the second one is you join a regular class. So I do believe that the answer should be coming in. I'll give you sort of another 30 seconds and let you know how people have voted on this. Okay, just another few seconds and we'll see what people chose. Oh, it's almost half-half. This is really interesting. So what seems to be the answer is most people, 56%, have chosen to join a regular class immediately, but they get help several times a week from a language teacher. Okay, that's really interesting that it was half-half. It makes me quite happy to see that people are not too swayed to the side that would probably be less helpful. Basically, what we know about students who don't speak a language of instruction is that within around 3 to 6 months of being in a mainstream class, so a class where they're surrounded by other children who do speak the language of instruction, perhaps at home and in other places, that they actually manage to gain what we call social language acquisition, so they can function in the classroom. Can you pass me a pencil? Can you tell me what book we're using? They can function in the playground, pass the football, let's go over here and have a snack. And they can function sort of in day-to-day life, getting to school, getting on the bus, etc. And that really only takes 3 to 6 months for most children, pretty much up to the age of 18. Younger children obviously can take 9, 10 weeks. And what's great about the younger children is that that social language is actually academic language, because the words that they're using and needing in school are the same words that they're using and needing in their sort of real life at home and with other children. There is, of course, nuance to this. Across Europe, for example, we have very different approaches, but we still do have many children who are placed in segregated classes for almost as long as 6 years in some countries. And so they don't ever really get that opportunity to gain that social language. And so why it's so important to try and have children less segregated is not just for that social language and them being able to speak, but it's also because often their curricular studies can be completely arrested because we're focusing only on language acquisition and ensuring that they have all the right vocabulary and all the right grammar to move ahead. So for countries that are still pursuing the segregation option, the ones that might be more successful are ones that limit it to 6 months or a year, and also focus on integration opportunities. So at break times, we see children playing with other children. During the sports lessons, they're all together. During the art lessons, they're all together. During other lessons that might not need as much linguistic content. Secondly, the other thing that makes a big difference is when we have content teachers actually coming into those classes and making sure that there is a base level of what people are learning in class in language that still relates to the curriculum, because there's no point in learning the language if you're going to get 3 years behind on the curriculum. So that was our first one. The second question that we have, which is going to be launched, and we'll see what you guys come up with. Now we have a wonderful situation where everyone is born again, and you can choose option 1, where you decide to be a native born student, but you're born in a very low socioeconomic bracket. And you've got the second choice here, which is that you're actually a migrant student and you happen to be born in a slightly higher socioeconomic bracket. So we're not talking about, let's say, the top quintile, but we're talking about the bottom two. So the lowest quintile, for example, with a native born student, and the quintile just above that for a migrant student. If you go ahead and vote, I'll give you another 30 seconds and the answers will come up pretty soon. What do you think is going to be more successful on Grow, on average? What's going to make you more successful educationally? We'll give a little bit more time to the tech team to get those results out to us. Very interesting. And so now we've got much more of a difference here. We see 76% of you decided that you would prefer to be a migrant student in a higher socioeconomic bracket. Now, of course, this is almost a trick question on my heart. There is no hard and fast answer because individuals and individual situations rule above any statistical analyses that we take on Grow. However, what we can see is that in very few countries, and the US happens to be one of them, there is actually very little difference between being born as a native student in a very impoverished situation and living as a migrant student in a very impoverished situation. And so actually the impact of current services, housing, health, basic services, social services, parental support, etc., is incredibly predictive on all children's ability to succeed educationally and with their academics. Now, I don't say this to say it's not as important to focus on migrant students, we should focus on all students. But what we need to think of, if we are working on educational policy for migrant students and vulnerable groups, is that these linkages with social services, health services, and particularly housing are so, so important. And what we have seen is that in countries such as Canada and in Australia and even in New Zealand, they actually have a much higher amount of students that we would classify as academically resilient, a much higher amount of migrant students, I should say, that we would classify as academically resilient. And the reason, one of the reasons at least why we know that they are more academically resilient is that a lot of these basic needs for them have been provided for. So what we don't want to do is allow migrant students who don't speak the native language of instruction and perhaps deal with other challenges to have this double disadvantage of being put in an area where they have less access to services and perhaps a school that is not as wealthy as schools in other areas and doesn't have the same kind of opportunities and resources. So in general, one of the big policy practices that I think is super important in educational policy is to reach laterally at the local level and see what can we do to provide for these children in other areas. We need to link up our housing, we need to link up our health, we need to see if we can bundle all these services together and make sure that it's possible to serve migrant children in a wider way than just focusing on narrow educational policy. Okay, I'm going to do just one more game with you. And so now the last poll is you have a choice as a new student who's arriving in a school to go to two different types of schools. And so you have a child, let's say, and you're about to, and they're 8 years old, you're about to send them to a school in a new country. And one of them is sort of advertising that they've got a really tailored approach to the needs of migrant students. So they're really aware of the needs of migrant students and they try and provide for them. The other school that you have is tailored more to a whole child approach, something that looks at socio-emotional needs, something that looks at all the needs that all children have. So your question is, do you go to a school that has a really targeted policy, or do you choose a school that has a more open policy that cares or that is interested in the whole child, in all children? So I'll give you again about 30 seconds to have a little choice, and then we'll go into detail on that one. Okay, so let's see if we can get the answers up from the tech team, please. Okay, this is very interesting. This is very interesting. So 83% of you have decided that you're going to send your child to a whole child approach school. It's really interesting, isn't it? One of the things that we say in education policy often is that if you think you have a plan or a policy or something that is going to work for a particularly vulnerable group of children, the chances are it's probably going to work for all children. It's just that we don't see the needs in the other children as much as we might see them in certain vulnerable groups. So actually this choice of a whole child approach is a very, very understandable one and completely makes sense. Again, it's a little bit of a tricky answer because I think that sometimes when we take an approach specifically for migrant children, what we know is that sometimes the socio-emotional aspect can be involved and sometimes it isn't. It just focuses on language inclusion and perhaps a little bit of parental support for parents that don't speak the native language and parents who are new to the country. In honesty, we don't have a lot of evidence to show that either one of these is particularly better than the other one, but we do know a couple of things. The first one is schools that do both work much better. So schools that do have an embracing whole child approach that accept the socio-emotional skills and all that kind of goodness that move children's academic success forward and are able to understand the specific needs of migrant children will obviously do better than one that does only one or the other one. I think the second thing that we do know is that learners' social and emotional needs are absolutely critical in ensuring that children can thrive in educational lives. And even the PISA data tells us that on average, schools that have a higher concentration of migrant students not only perform poorer academically, but also have lower rates of socio-emotional well-being. So I think whatever policy we're pursuing, we need to make sure that that socio-emotional whole child approach actually is integrated into it, whether we call it for a migrant or whether we call it a policy that embraces all children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mialy. It's a pleasure for us at MPG to be part of the Sirius Network. And I think that Mialy's presentation shows you that there is this expertise out there in research and practitioners to help countries improve on education policies. And Mialy, there might be some questions in the chat that you want to answer. But now I turn it over to Melis Ari for her 10-minute reaction on this international area of weakness on political participation policies and citizenship. So Melis Ari is joining us from Finland, where she works at Mieli Suomi, which works on mental health, but she also has worked before with Familiari, if I remember correctly, the Bicultural Family Association of Finland, and before that with Monihili, the main umbrella organization of migrant-led organizations, where she led the great work on iCount on political participation. And she's also a member of the Transatlantic Migrant Democracy Dialogue, TMDD. So Melis, we wanted your reactions. Again, where do you think we should be putting our priorities? Who should be leading this work? What do you want to see in the next 3 years in the next MIPEX?
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you for the lovely introduction as well. I don't need to do that myself now, but yes, my name is Melis Ari Gürhanlı. And thank you for having the chance to comment today on the political participation bit on the MIPEX key findings on behalf of Transatlantic Migrant Democracy Dialogue Network. We are a network of migrant and refugee leaders and community organizers striving for just, inclusive, vibrant, and diverse democracies that function for all people, where migrants and refugees are full participants. Let me see how my, presentation is working. So political participation is above all an action. It's an action for change, or sometimes it's an action for no change, but it is an action regardless. And any action needs a drive, will to influence. And this will requires a sense of belonging. if one does not see him or herself as part of a community or the society, why would somebody want to invest in its future? Or if one does not see his or her future in that country, why would that person really care? Action also requires belief in the power of agency. In the context of political participation, it means trust in the system. That's how I see it. And building trust among newcomers and the host society is at least a two-way process. Luckily, there are multiple ways of participating politically. Electoral participation is just one way, and it is a way that gives the agency the systemic recognition and acknowledgement, a basic human right, if you think about it. But one can also participate via consultative forums, bodies, by volunteering, demonstrating, or through trade unions. Migrants are, for example, more likely to be politically active in countries with higher level of trade union membership. The MIPEX results does analyze political participation of immigrants, paying attention to these diverse paths and engagements, and this is more than welcome also from the practitioner perspective. What MIPEX tells about migrant political participation is, like it has already been mentioned, it is the area which has the weakest scores. Though countries are showing renewed interest in voting rights and creation of consultative bodies, there is still a lot to be developed. Integration policies aim at successful incorporation of immigrants to host countries' institutions, with the focus mostly being on access to labor markets. This approach often is linked in practice with learn the language first approach. And relatively speaking, there is still less attention given to social, cultural, or identity-based integration, and not to mention political participation. And this is once again just proven by the MIPEX results. In most countries, immigrants can join political parties in most of the MIPEX countries, but there are several countries in Central Europe or Mexico or Russia or some Asian countries that are included in the MIPEX 52 that deny immigrants the basic political liberties of joining a political party or founding an association. And with the exception of Korea, immigrants in Asian countries enjoy almost none of the political rights unless they are actually naturalized. But also practices in Europe differ a lot. There is no European way, as has been said. Non-EU nationals can stand as candidates and vote in local elections only in 7 EU countries at the moment. And then political participation is close to non-existent from integration strategies in some other, like in Bulgaria, Lithuania, or Romania. And the countries with largest number of immigrants in Europe, like Germany, Spain, France, and Italy, actually score 60 or lower, which I find quite alarming. And it's not actually a surprise that the political participation scores are more or less in line with the equal opportunity scores. But why does it matter? Why does immigrant political participation matters? In Europe, there are 20 million non-EU citizens who are not eligible to vote in EU elections, actually, and that is like 5% of the Europe population. So those people are literally not recognized as political agents. And if democracy is a core value of Europe, I think there's plenty to improve within that field. Immigrants are not seen as agencies, but in practice as subjects and as service recipients at mercy at the moment. And this needs to change. There is one quotation we often repeat in our TMDD gatherings and summits, which was said by a fellow, another leadership team member, which is, if you're not at the table, you are most likely on the menu. But what needs to be changed, and how and where to look? Well, obviously, those countries who have scored maybe 80 or plus in the political participation can be the first addresses to look, like Finland, Ireland, or Portugal and New Zealand. But there are also very strong best practices at local and regional levels, which, like in countries where the scores might be lower, like in Italy or in Greece. And it is, I think, of extreme importance to build intercontinental or even transatlantic networks like TMDD to strengthen the information flow on best practices and make better use of the collected and the collective experiences. During the pandemic now, for example, what Portugal did and allowed equal access to migrants and asylum seekers for public services was not news on mainstream media in many countries, but through the networks, the news spread, and it did inspire migrant-led communities to demand similar actions from authorities. The democracy and leadership programs within countries are very effective. One good example is the Immigrant Council of Ireland's leadership academies. In Finland also, in the last 2017 municipal elections, the turnout of Somali community members in the elections was quite high, and this was due to the candidates, Somali background candidates being quite many at different cities. So the representation did matter and affect immediately the turnout of the immigrant votes as well. The strengthening deliberative democracy tools is also very important. More and more people are looking for alternative ways to participate and getting away from traditional democratic institutions. So residents' initiatives, for example, are very effective methods that can be easily adapted at local levels. Or practices like our election, also practiced here in Finland by Moniheli, the multicultural organizations network, provides safe spaces to strengthen the dialogue and also to build the trust. And that initiative is also supported by the ministries, which takes me to my next level, the supporting immigrant-led civil societies. Consultative forums and advisory boards are increasing. I'll cut short. They're increasing, but they're not actually substitutes for political rights. Can you hear?
Yep, we can hear you fine. If you
Okay,
wanna-
something's happening anyways. Sorry. But yeah, I was just saying that like the supporting of the immigrant-led organizations is very important. And they shouldn't be based on the government's priorities, but more on the community's needs. So there needs to be stable funding and stable support for immigrant-led civil society movements and initiatives and organizations. The Commission has now formed this expert group on integration, which is very much welcomed. And I'm really excitingly waiting to see what's going to come out of it and how that expert group is also going to pave way to stronger partnership, equal partnership between the decision-making bodies and immigrant-led society communities. But last but not least, I just want to say that changing narratives also matters. We are often speaking about the second generation migrants, for example. Why not refer to those as first generation residents or citizens, depending on where they are living? People move, and they will settle to new places. And in their new places, they will shape the societies. And this is inevitable. Yeah, I'm sorry if I ran over time. I think we're all a bit ahead of our schedules now, but yeah.
Thank you so much, Melis. I think that your comments also tell us to think about a shift in our perspective, that migrant leadership is there, exists, but requires more support, more consultation, resourcing, information, and that's really important to develop. So I think it's great if anyone's interested to know more in the work that TMDD is doing, you can contact Melis. But you've also raised this question about what can we do now at the European level? And that's where I want to turn over to our last intervention from Antoine Savary, who's the Deputy Head of Unit at the European Commission, DG Home, which coordinates the work on legal migration and integration. Antoine has been doing this now for several years, since before the 2015-16 arrivals. So when the EU created its previous integration action plan, and now we have a new plan. So Antoine, we wanted to hear what links you see between MIPEX and the EU integration plan, and then we'd have a little bit of a conversation, also based on questions we're receiving here in the chat, about some of the different areas that MIPEX raises as weaknesses and strengths, and what you see the EU could be doing on this in the future.
Yes, thank you, Thomas, and good afternoon, everyone. Quite happy to be here, and quite happy to see, to have been presented the result of the MIPEX. I mean, just a word on MIPEX. It's for us a very interesting tool, because it was said in the movie that we have seen that it's something that has existed for 15 years. And it's very interesting to see the change and the evolution across time, beyond also the ranking. It's for us even more relevant since the indeed the Commission has adopted an action plan on integration and inclusion a few weeks ago, and we have presented quite an ambitious framework with a series of actions, and a plan which, in comparison with the one we have adopted in 2016, I think go beyond in trying to frame integration in a broader agenda on fighting exclusion, on fostering social inclusion, with several initiatives which are related to the also to the action plan, like the gender equality strategy, the plan against the EU plan against racism, etc. Then we are very interested, of course, by MIPEX, because it's a ranking. Then it's very interesting how different member states fare, because we as Commission have never done really this benchmark, because it's also quite difficult as an institution to rank member state. You know, we are a political institution, and that's not always easy, and can trigger reactions. Then it's very good that we have an organization like MPG, which is an independent one, who can have a fair and transparent and balanced look at all these issues and give us, you know, some observation and some thoughts of what's going well and what's not going. Then, I mean, the results are not surprising to us. I mean, we know that, for example, Finland or Sweden are countries that traditionally fare very well on integration or invest a lot on integration. As you know, we have a Swedish commissioner, Ylva Johansson, who is very committed on this topic and who helped us a lot to produce this action plan with all our experience in Sweden as Minister of Employment responsible for integration. Something I would like to stress is, and this has been underlined by the previous speakers, is, and this is one of the innovation of this action plan, the role of the whole society. I think, as it was stressed, I mean, integration is a two-way process, and maybe we have not realized enough in the past years how important it is to associate and to involve the whole society in the integration process. It has to be a balanced, indeed, effort, both by migrants, but also from the whole society, and providing opportunities. And that's one, indeed, of the criteria on which countries are set in MIPEX. And that's, I think, a very important point to stress that we want to foster in the action plan. Then, yes, that's the main introductory remark I wanted to do about MIPEX. Then we will look into that also, because what we would like to do, and this is one of the priorities of the action plan, is to improve the monitoring of integration policies. As I have already said, it's a very sensitive issue. Member states do not like to be wronged or to be classified, and would not like to be wronged by the European Commission on a policy which is indeed still quite a national policy. I mean, we don't have strong competence at EU level to harmonize the integration policies. Then it can be a sensitive topic, but we'll try to develop something, maybe not to blame and shame, but really to put forward the good practices and good example of what is positive, you know, in each member state, because we have seen that there are some good examples, but there are also some aspects where some countries fare better than others. Then it's a bit the idea that we have with this monitoring and the reinforcement of evaluation at EU level.
Thank you, Antoine. I mean, I wanted to go into some of the different areas, maybe first the two weaknesses that we've discussed, because that's also where we have questions from the chat. So, I mean, maybe the question that came from Melis first, which is, there's this new expert group on the views of migrants. It had 350 applicants with 24 members. That's great. But we know that in many European countries, political participation is not yet a priority. So immigrants are then not only less likely to vote, but also to participate in all different types of ways. So do you have any ideas of how the Commission could be working with these leaders in the expert group to try and better inform, consult, and support immigrant civil society?
Yes, I mean, just a word on this is typically an example of an action that maybe wouldn't have been possible without a commissioner so involved and so convinced that this was a good idea and a good initiative. For example, it was not so easy, I must say, to set up this group, but we were convinced that, and the commissioner was convinced that it was a good idea. And indeed, it's quite crazy to think in a way that we we do and we work on migration and integration policy without asking their opinion to the first people who are concerned, this is to say migrants themselves. Then this is I would say the basic principle, but now we are quite happy to put it into motion. And yes, I mean the call for interest that we launched, we were totally overwhelmed by applications, and I must say that out of maybe 400 applications, we had surely 100 excellent applications. I think we could have had four expert group, but of course we for practical reasons we are limited to a number of 20. We have even extended to 24, and I must say we had a first meeting to consult this expert group on the action plan. They gave us some very good indications and very good, in particular on this aspect of participation, of course, but not only on many aspects. We are quite happy with that. We'll continue. Then they will be consulted on all the initiatives that we'll have. We will have some consultation on legal migration, where we will ask them on reintegration in third countries. Then there are many topics on the agenda for the future year where we will consult them. And we hope also that this will be also a source of inspiration for other countries or other municipalities to set up this expert group. I mean, doesn't mean that you are bound by, of course, the opinion of this expert group, but I think it's essential to ask for their opinion on their views in order not to leave any aspect, you know, of a question you want to address with your policy, because I mean, it's really a basic principle on the basis of a bottom-up approach. I mean, we at a commission level, we have a tendency sometimes to be top down. I mean, you know, we have someone as an idea and we must put it in practice. For this action plan, this is really the contrary we have done. We have consulted very broadly. We have set up this expert group. We have consulted local regional authorities, social and economic partners, NGOs, etc. And I think it's a good way to make a policy.
So then maybe looking at the other area of weakness internationally identified by MIPEX, migrant education policies. I mean, we see there are very weak policies that mean that there are achievement gaps across the generations, and not all students feel like they belong at school, because many schools don't actually receive different financial and technical support that they need, and trainings on an intercultural inclusive approach aren't reaching a lot of teachers and students. So, I mean, how are DG Home and DG Education trying to tackle education in this new EU integration action plan?
Yes, indeed. I mean, education is, I would say, is the most, I mean, maybe most powerful tool for integration, if I can put it this way, or the area most important, because that's where everything begins. And when you look at the figures of young people not in employment, education, or training, we have approximately twice non-EU born who are not in employment, education, training between the age of 18 and 24 compared with native young people. You have also a dropout rate. I mean, people who leave the education system without secondary education, which is also twice than the one of natives. Then we really have to address that. I mean, of course, it's not easy because, again, education system depend on member state. It's really a national policy, but we have, I think, two directions where we can act at EU level, and mostly through the channel of Erasmus+, which is the fund, you know, for education. On the two directions in which we want to act on the intervention of a previous speaker of the Sirius network really comforted me at least in this. The first one is to create an environment which allows migrant children to feel at ease and to integrate easily in the classroom, and that the education policies take into account the diversity of children who are in the classroom. Of course, you have to mainstream integration in education policies, and you have to adapt these education policies to the needs of a diverse audience. And that's the first thing. Then, indeed, I mean, it was well explained that you can have at the beginning these classes with only migrant children, but very quickly you have to mainstream in normal classes. But at the beginning, I think you have to make an extra effort. You have to take really into account the differences and the gaps in education that can exist with migrant children. And this is the first thing, and we'll try to address that. And the second area is to help teachers indeed to manage this with trainings, with tools, with a series of exchange also between member states to help teachers to deal with diverse classroom. I mean, this is not given. This is not but because you have been trained as a teacher that you can do that. It's quite difficult to handle this diversity. And I think we will try to help foster that and to help to support that with through Erasmus+. And we will have a new toolkit on that, which will be developed for education and for teachers in the coming years. And that's the two areas where we want to act in the field of education through, yes, indeed, DG EAC and Erasmus+, which will be the main vectors of our action in that area.
Okay, I have one last question for you, because we have actually different areas of MyPECs, right? And so I wonder for you, based on the integration action plan and on what you think we can achieve given the major divergences across Europe, is there any one area of the MyPECs where you are most optimistic, where you think that the next time we come around in 3 years, we might see improvements in policies in this one area because the integration action plan or other EU initiatives are really going to put a priority on this area?
Well, the hope, I think, is to foster the involvement on two aspects. The involvement of whole society, I think it is really an aspect which is important. We'll try to support that with funding, with calls for proposal, etc. We have already done in the past, but this is something surely that we are going to do. And of course, we have a lot of work because we have some areas and some cities, as you have mentioned, or some countries, but even within countries, you have a big difference between, big cities and rural areas, for example. Some can be more welcoming than others. But I think we have to try to push this idea that the whole society has to act and to alleviate the fears, build trust. It's all this idea of having cohesive societies on social inclusion, on foster social inclusion. Then I think that's an area which is super important because I mean, if it's a two-way process, as I mentioned, and I think in the past we of course it's important to provide support directly to migrants, but also to help the whole society to raise the challenge of integration and provide opportunities to meet is also a crucial area for integration. Then we hope that we will see that, and I think this is linked also to participation, not only political participation, but participation in general in the social life of at local level. Then this is something also that we want to foster. Then on these two aspects, yes, I hope the action plan will have an impact, and we will see that in 6 years, because the duration in 7 years, even in 2027. But we'll have a midterm review in 24 to see if we have to adjust that.
It's great to know that the Commission has a long-term commitment then to continuing to mainstream integration. So I ask all of our speakers to rejoin with their video, and I turn to MPG's Head of Communications, Carmen Clemente, who's been monitoring the chat, trying to get several of our speakers to already answer your really diverse questions, but Carmen has prioritized a few trending questions. Over to you, Carmen.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Thomas, and thank you all the panelists. As Thomas said, we received some questions in the chat box. And if you see that your question is not answered, you can send it to the email from which you received the invitation that comes at micpolgroup.com, and we will do our best to answer them. So I'm going to remind the speakers that you have 1 minute to answer the question in order to be on time, and so that we don't keep people more than the time. Question goes to Ali. Regarding the two classroom situation, is there any data on multilingual classrooms where students could actually be taught content in their own mother tongue?
Yes, so there are a few progressive states in the US where they do have bilingual schools, multilingual classrooms. I can tell you that in Cambridge, Massachusetts, they've got very successful models of Spanish-English classrooms, and many of the children come from a Haitian background and are also mixed with local children from Massachusetts. Those schools are really successful. There are also schools that try and promote mother tongue language in Europe, particularly in Finland and in Germany and in Sweden. We know that mother tongue classrooms, mother tongue instruction is available, but it tends to be extracurricular after school. So while I think we're still working on understanding the value of all languages, because I think in Europe we still put sort of English up top and then maybe French or German underneath that, and we need to start valuing Arabic, we need to start valuing Somali. I do believe that we are moving towards that, particularly in the case of Finland, that does actually view linguistic diversity of all learners. So even local Finnish children, for example, learning Somali as something that we should be working towards. I hope that was 1 minute.
Thank you, Miali. We have another question that may be for Jacquo and Melis, if you want to respond. We see that political participation is still considered as one of the weakest immigration policies. But how about unconventional forms of participations? Any data and any changes in the past 5 years?
Maybe I can answer and then leave the unconventional part to Melis, let's say. So I must say that political participation is still, of course, one of the weakest areas, but it's also the one that improved the most. So by 10 points, plus 10 points over the last 5 years. But still, as I said, the situation is critical. So for example, in 21 out of 52 countries, migrants are still not consulted at the national level. And also in 30 countries, their participation and their membership in political parties is restricted. So you see that although there have been some improvement, there is a long way to go.
I think Ireland and Finland were the two countries where there was like also an increase on the consultative platforms and their usage. But as you said, there's like still a lot to be done. But also, like I said in my speech, even though it is extremely important to have these agencies and bodies and consultative platforms, they still don't substitute the right because they don't have decision-making powers. And it is very challenging for a lot of self-advocacy platforms and teams to maintain themselves like resource-wise.
Thank you very much, Melis. I see there are more questions coming in, but as I said, we need to keep track of the time. So I'm gonna give the floor to Thomas for the closure of the event.
All right, thank you so much, Carmen. Again, MyPEX is a major resource that allows you to maybe see links between policies that you didn't see before, get to know countries that you didn't know before, and maybe find solutions that you didn't know before. It's also a cutting edge research that's helping us to better see what are those links between policies and outcomes, what can be realistic expectations for our policies to achieve. And I know many of you are also doing that cutting edge research, which we're going to continue to monitor multi-level, multivariate analyses of MIPEX. If you want to invite the MIPEX team to your country or to your organization because you want to really know more, then you can contact us at mipex@migpolgroup.com. And I just want to end with a big thank you. So I turn over to Giacomo for the thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to share this slide with all the thank you and all the partners that, sorry. Yeah. So as MIPEX, let's say the journey for this new edition of MIPEX started more than 1 year ago. We received a wonderful support from many researchers, from CIDOB, our partner in Barcelona, from Professor David Ingleby from University of Amsterdam, that was the coordinator of the health policy area, for many assistants, like, for example, Sara Bortoletti, Marco Paron Trivellato, Khadija Jobe, Anna Busquets, and Carlota Comella de Montserrat, which were really helpful in making this happen. We want especially to thank all the 150 plus national partners and researchers that they did a wonderful job and make it easy for us to finalize this edition. I also want to thank you and to let you know that this MIPEX edition was founded by the European Commission through the cross-migration project and by the Center for Global Development, in particular on the non-European part of MIPEX. Part of the analysis has been also conducted in the frame of this new Horizon 2020 project that started last year, which is called Hummingbird, and on which or as a part of which we will focus on the link between integration and migration policy also, and integration outcomes and migration trends. So stay tuned, we will keep you updated. Thank you.
And I would also like to thank Giacomo and Carmen for their really diligent work, bringing us the MIPEX and bringing us these national launches. So we hope in the future to be bringing you new MIPEX countries, new areas of integration, and new analysis on the links between integration policies and outcomes. Follow us again at mipex.eu or the other research and networks of the Migration Policy Group. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Thomas, also for your wonderful work.